Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Julie Moon. I'm Senior Research Analyst with Finovate. Today we're going to be talking about prioritizing the customer experience in your payment strategy. Now I want to stop for a minute and have everyone think about the last time they received a paper check. Think about the last time you received a paper check for under $50. Now think about the last time you received a paper check for under $20 or maybe under $10. Now, it's more common than you might think. I have actually received a paper check in the mail from the state of Montana for exactly $1. Did I deposit that check? No, I did not. I thought it was so funny to have a check issued to me for $1 that I hung it up on my wall, and I still have that check today. Because at the time, that was before remote deposit capture. There was no way I was going to walk down to my bank and deposit that check. And think about the friction that's involved there, and think about how you felt as a consumer. Maybe you felt frustrated with the issuing party. There's a lot involved when it comes to paper checks. So I'm thrilled today to have Max Grande, VP Vertical Market Solutions at Onbe, who's going to be talking about this exact same problems and other problems and pain points and how to solve them in the payments world. Now, you're going to want to stick around and you're going to want to pay attention because you will learn how to identify and analyze specific needs and preferences of your customers when it comes to payment options. You're going to learn strategies for creating smooth and frictionless payment experiences. And you're going to learn how to personalize and prioritize payment experiences to build stronger customer relationships and loyalty. With that, I will let Max take the stage.
Thank you, Julie. I love that story, by the way. It is incredible, especially in today's world, how often we spend so much time focusing on a process and getting a payment out the door and not indexing on what that actual recipient's journey looks like and their experience with it. So I'm super excited to be here. Welcome to our webinar. As Julie mentioned, my name is Max Grande. I help with how we think about entering new spaces at a company that's called Onbe, that's focused on business to consumer payouts. So at the end of the day, Onbe helps businesses pay people how they want to get paid. And this is an amazing topic because, especially in today's world, if you're not designing for the end user experience first, you're doing it all wrong. And over the past few years, what we've seen with the explosion of the digital economy, it's really changed the power dynamics where now consumers, they can shift banking relationships, they can choose a new provider, they can work with a new company. So providing that unique, seamless experience is really no longer a nice to have, but it's table stakes. And it's a differentiator at the end of the day for any business in any space. So today, as Julie mentioned, we're gonna really focus on these three bullets. We're gonna focus on understanding consumer preferences and expectations. We'll spend a little bit of time going into really kind of tactical tools on what that could look like, leaning into actually talking to people. So things like customer surveys, things like user feedback. How can you gather and direct that feedback on payment preferences in order to guide your strategy? We'll talk a little bit about how you can leverage data, how you can get that data, how you can think about your customers and start to segment them out. We're also going to hit the payment experience itself. So when you think about what are users actually receiving today, and based on that information that you gathered when you spoke to actual users, what do they actually want? It's all around streamlining user interfaces. It's around optimizing the context of the payment, making it mobile responsive, and then sticking in with making sure it's secure and compliant too, which is obviously paramount when you think about a payment. Lastly, we'll spend a few minutes on optimizing that payment experience for that individual recipient themselves. So could be a ton of things tucked in there. New payment modalities, especially if you're serving a wide demographic of recipients. Some people are still going to want to get that check, Julie, because they live right next door to the bank and they'll cash it all day long. You and me both, we're going to hang that on our wall and look at it every morning and think about how there's a better way to do it. And then there's naturally new payment modalities that are up and coming that people are starting to really lean into, that are growing with regards to a base. You can think about offers and rewards. So when you're actually sending a payment, what a perfect time to put a personalized discount for that recipient so they can go ahead and leverage those funds to drive spend back to your business. And then, as I touched on a little bit there, thinking about what I like to call omni-channel payouts, but based on that life cycle of that recipient. They could be interacting with you online, they could be in person, they could be on an app. How do you make sure that it's clear and consistent so that the engagement points with that individual really drive the behavior that you want to see? So I love all of it. We're going to jump right in, and I'm a big believer in context. So the very first thing that we're going to focus on here today is how are people actually getting paid? Want to throw in some statistics here because the amount of payouts in the United States specifically is just astronomical. These are business to person payments, $3 trillion. So it's a substantial amount of flows that are going through from businesses to consumers. And a lot of those are checks, $1.7 trillion of volume done through paper checks today. So when we think about what does the market look like? Is it ripe for disruption? What do consumers want? You have these tailwinds from the digitization throughout the pandemic, shift to digital payments. When you look globally at large, there's a lot of companies out there today that are already largely digital, and their reliance on cash or check with regards to paying out individuals is way down. And the other thing that, Julie, you touched on a little bit is that $1 check payment that went out, that probably cost that company between $5 and $12 to actually cut that check. So they're spending $10, call it, to cut you a $1 check. And when you don't cash it, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen behind the scenes from an unclaimed property perspective. So there's from a strategy perspective, from a business perspective, and again, indexing on that recipient journey and that recipient experience, tons of flows. And what we have today doesn't really hit the mark with regards to what consumers want. And it doesn't hit the mark with regards to what works for a business from optimization, from driving that user behavior, from driving that experience, and ultimately to growing a business through leveraging a payout. So I wanted to start there because I think it's important to understand what are people receiving today? Largely half of the volume, $1.7 trillion through paper checks. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So the second thing that I really believe in is actually talking to people. So it's really easy for us, especially in today's world, to spend a lot of time going through the what ifs. And there's naturally a time and place for that. But when you want to understand a consumer preference and you're designing a payment strategy around that consumer preference, you really need to get out and you need to engage with those consumers. And it can take a number of different flavors. But at the end of the day, what I found most impactful is a variety of surveys. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about some best practices or thoughts where maybe you haven't done that before or you're not sure what it looks like, but you know anecdotally that there is a need for changing your payout strategy and changing how you're delivering payments to individuals because you've been getting those reports from customer service saying, hey, people are asking where their money's at, or because you're paying 2 or 3 individuals in-house to manage a shipment because so many checks go uncashed, right? So the first step here is actually getting out in the field and asking people and honestly living it firsthand yourself, like what would you want to receive? So we tend to lean into kind of 2 flavors of surveys. So especially in the payment space, there can be so many different players. We like to go right down to the end user. So how do you get detailed feedback from the actual recipient themselves, irrespective of whoever's paid them? So what I love about Ombi and what we do is we do this quite a bit, and we do it through a number of different slices. So you can take this and slice and dice it by demographic. You can slice and dice it by the use case, the vertical, what have you. And what we're showing right now is statistics from our overarching payouts landscape report that we put out annually. And it touches on 3 statistics that we really index on when we think about what is an ideal payment strategy. So the first is choice, especially when you're serving large demographics of individuals. Having choice for a recipient goes a long way. Because for me, maybe I'm in a good position right now and I'm okay to get, call it an ACH transaction, will take a couple days to clear. If you talk to me in a few days closer to payroll, when I'm maybe running out of cash, you better bet that I may pay a few dollars in order to get those funds instantly. So really leaning into that choice in order to not only serve the wide range of individuals, but then for a specific individual, where they're at in their life today is critical. So overwhelming 92% want to receive funds through more than one payment, which naturally, Julie, I'm sure you're in the same boat. So would I. The second component reinforces that to say, as you're going through the digital payment modalities, you will want to receive several different choices upfront, right? So as we touched on with the modalities themselves, not only could they be digital, but you also are providing a choice format around them. And the last bit is 53% believe that electronic payments are more secure. So this was an interesting point for me as I kind of took back and resonated with that statistic. People trust physical payments because they've received them all their life. So this really leans into the context of the transaction. So when you're thinking about designing a payment strategy overall, how and when are you releasing that payment to that individual? And it leans into payment notifications. It leads into how you're engaging with the recipient. That goes a long way, right? So half of the people effectively think digital is more effective. Half of the people think that physical is more effective. And for me, when you look at what are the acceptance rates, how do people want to receive their funds? It's important that you're not just delivering a transaction with no context overall, is how I interpret that. So as you lean into digital, you want to make sure that you have the surrounding user experiences really thought through and built out. And it just to tie back into the surveys, thinking about the timing that you're delivering a survey, you want to get really isolated on where in a flow are you asking questions? What questions are you asking? You want to keep it really tight, right? Maybe 5 to 10 questions in order to limit the amount of, call it abandoned shopping cart experiences around that, right? So keep it really crisp, where in the flow, and then oftentimes offer incentives for it too, right? It could be maybe discounted rate, maybe it could be an entry into promotional offer, it could be delivering a gift card, but that investment in getting that user feedback will go a long way in the overarching strategy creation for your group. So these were 3 facts that we really kind of wanted to isolate an index on it. And the vibe is choice, speed, and convenience all day long for recipients as they interact with you as an organization. So once you go out and you talk to people and you're saying, okay, choice, speed, and convenience, we hear that, it's reinforced. How do you start to take that feedback and then segment it and actually action on it accordingly? So it's one thing to go out and talk to people and then let the survey results kind of sit there and maybe you put it in a deck, but starting to translate that into your go-to-market strategy, your sales strategy, how you're marketing yourself overall, and then the product build in order to think about where can we optimize our touch points? And if we're not able to do it ourselves, what are some best-in-class partners that have done this before that they can really help guide from a partnership perspective? What does good look like, right? And get us there faster. So there's the surveys, there's acting on the surveys, and then there's feedback loops. So taking a beat to not just do this once, but try to find opportunities continuously, and it doesn't need to be in the same spot, but could be getting out there and doing a newsletter, engaging in social media, right? Finding different points in the flow in order to engage in that user feedback. It goes a long way with regards to making sure you're continuously on that cutting edge because user behavior changes, things happen, new products are built, people start to use apps more, they're starting to get instant payments more, and you can't sit on still data for more than a couple of years. So we wanted to tie this in here really kind of as the jumping off point to really understand what your recipients want. And we've done a little bit of the legwork there with regards to our own surveys, but always good to hear directly from your own base. So after you talk to your own recipients, there's usually another layer that needs to be put on top of it, and it's the concept of market research at large. So where are you in a space? And I think it's important to use data as the guide there, so you can get the feedback, you can look at market research overall, and then you need to start to segment your customers. So we have a couple statistics out here that wide range of use cases where payouts is really core. to the user experience overall. You can look at things like people are paying more for rent. And when you pay more for rent, you're also putting down more for a security deposit payment. And if you have maybe $2,000 coming your way, would you rather get a check in 7 to 10 days, or would you rather get that money instantly? Right? There's an opportunity there where you can engage that customer experience. You can put your brand, you can put strategic partnerships right in front of a person as they're receiving that security deposit payout, for example. And then you can drive that user experience. Maybe they're looking for a new place, and you can drive them to, hey, we have 4 other apartment complexes in this area. Think about applying for one, right? Automotive loan payments are increasing. So when you pay off your vehicle, you're often getting a transaction back. Energy and utility is really interesting depending on where you live, right? You could have incentives in order to buy a service. You could be putting up a deposit there in order to turn your service on. Insurance. We all know that when you get a claim payout for an insurance claim, you generally want that money fast. But believe it or not, more than 50% of those are going out through checks today still. And then at the end of the day, healthcare too, right? So think about having a procedure done, you're paying out of pocket for the procedure, maybe you overpaid and you want to get that refund back. So taking a look at what is going on in my space overall from that market research perspective, what data did I gather from those surveys that we did on the individual consumers, and how can you start to bucket those customers, right? The beautiful thing, and if you've worked in product before, this is kind of a best practice there, but starting to really drive customer personas or user personas from that segmentation and that data. The intent of this is to really start to put you as an individual in the shoes of Max, who just moved out of his apartment and he wants that $2,000 so he can go buy a new IKEA couch, right? Starting to think through from that perspective, how does it get better? How can we make this more seamless and elegant? How can I actually influence Max's behavior when he gets that payment? So that starts the user personas. Maybe you're slicing it across, tech-savvy millennials versus traditional recipients. You need to kind of cover the wide spectrum of individuals that you're servicing. And then you can start to map out that user journey as they receive the payment, as they interact with you. And some of the flows that we see today, there's a very consolidated timeline from the initial point of interaction with a recipient to the time that you're paying that recipient out. In the property management use case or the automotive use case, it could be a year, it could be 5 years from when that person first reached out and applied for that loan to when they paid off their vehicle and they're getting their returning balance on there. But payouts is so unique in the sense where you can have that one payout. They're a captive individual for your next acquisition of an individual consumer, right? So you have this unique, really sticky opportunity to make that a good experience or a bad experience. The other thing that's not to be understated is the concept of beta testing. So you think about when you're rolling out a new capability or a new service, the bias to action is really important. So getting things out early, trying to get things out fast, and then using that feedback in order to kind of guide how you're thinking about your strategy overall. Again, just sitting in kind of in your office, right, thinking about theoreticals. There's a time and place for that, but there's also that you're guessing up until you actually put it into individuals' hands. So that's where, if you're new to the payout space or you've been thinking about it before, working through partnerships where maybe they live and breathe it every single day, there's really an opportunity to go to market fast, get learnings, and then you can shape your strategy over time where maybe you want to take some of that user experience back in-house where you're trading off some of the economics in order to do that. So some things to think about around how are you actually going and talking to people? How do you fit within your market? With the recipients themselves, how are you segmenting them? How are you thinking about their flows overall, cradle to grave, from when they're interacting with your company? And making sure that it's consistent and really a meaningful interaction at every point that you have with them. All right, so now is the time. There's this phrase out there to take a brutal assessment of current reality. So I love that phrase. Probably say it too much, but what kind of business are you? And this is really interesting when you start to think about, hey, we have all these ideas, We think this is a direction that we want to go. This is kind of that last mile. Do you fall into one of these three buckets where maybe you're spending a lot on those checks, and you are when you look at the hard cost of that actual check going out, the printing, the mailing, the postage, and then you're also looking at what's the supporting processes internally for me to cut those checks, and you put them together and you say, yeah, I'm within that $5 to $12 per check range. That's a lot of money going out the door when you have scale, right? So thinking about that, there's also certain spaces where the reliance on maybe cash, for example, there's regulatory changes that are being put around that. So certain states, for example, if you're going to a recycling center and you're scrapping metal, they can no longer pay you in cash. So how do you digitize that in a way where it's really consistent with your business and that user experience overall? But you need to do that within a certain amount of time from a regulatory perspective, which is really interesting. And then lastly, I know I opened this with saying every company in every space should be indexing on customer experience. So this is kind of a little bit of low-hanging fruit because I do believe that. But if you, from a customer acquisition perspective, from a services perspective, the user experience, if that is critical to driving more traffic and more volume to your site, you better be thinking about how can a digital payment option really influence and drive more traffic and lower my cost of acquisition for my customers at the end of the day. Okay, so now we're going to get into the fun stuff around how do you actually make that seamless payment experience in order to enhance the overall customer experience at large. So we listened to the recipients that we surveyed earlier, where choice, speed, and convenience was jumping off the page. I want to reinforce some of that when 85% of recipients are saying that digital payouts is a top priority, right? So when you think about that digital choice and interacting with somebody, not only are they asking for it directly when you claim it, but when you say what's most important to you, it comes off and jumps off the slide as well. So indexing ourselves around that. And when you think about how can you start to leverage digital transactions in order to enhance that user experience at large, really leaning into the opportunities and the touch points from that recipient journey overall. It could be emailing them, capturing how they want to get paid, allowing them to enter their bank account information or choose a modality in a really seamless and beautiful way. At the end of the day, what we're seeing is opportunities to incorporate brand, incorporate messaging, incorporate call to action. That lives so beautifully and is dovetailed so nicely when somebody's receiving a payment. You can think of your holistic user experience at large and how that one payout interaction can really make or break if that customer is maybe going to be a repeat customer with you, if they're going to go and drive that spend back, if it contextually fits into their engagement with you, right? Maybe I had a medical procedure done a few years ago, and I'm just coming back to get maybe a second one performed, and then all of a sudden I get a refund and I'm not sure which one it was for or which provider it was for, right? So making sure that consistent engagement and consistent user experience surrounds the payment is critical. And then when you start to think about the choice perspective of it, so if you're coming from physical checks today, any company out there can go and they can call their bank, and that bank maybe can provide checks in ACH, right? Maybe wires. Then you can go to a mobile wallet provider and you can do an integration with them. You can start to call on Visa and MasterCard and see, can I access your real-time push to card? You can do an integration with a program manager for virtual cards. But now all of a sudden, you've just taken your project to digitize your check transactions and you've become a payments company, right? So you can't afford to even have a couple years of strategy and investment around this. Individuals are demanding consumer behavior is reinforcing it. Choice, speed, and convenience is paramount. And how can you start to reduce your time to market through choosing best in breed companies where this is what they do day in and day out? The other component is generating revenue. So when you think about cutting a check today and delivering it to an individual, that's a cost center for you. You're paying usually a per transaction item for that physical check to go out the door. You have the supporting services around it, be it the achievement, the reconciliation, your staff in order to answer that question when someone calls and says, "Where's my money?" Those are all cost centers. It's the same on an ACH transaction. It's the same on some of these other modalities. But when you start to bundle them together from the lens of the recipient experience, you can turn that cost center into a profit center by doing something very similar to what a lot of companies have done on the inbound acceptance, where maybe you have a number of different ways where individuals can pay you, and maybe some are more convenient than others, and you're charging convenience fees for those. Same motion on the outbound disbursement. You can do things like lead with a virtual card to get the money into the hand of the recipient as soon as possible to allow them flexibility to spend. Maybe they want to get that money out of their virtual card account, and maybe they want to get it into a bank account or into a peer-to-peer app. You can charge a convenience fee for that. So through just that simple combining the modalities under one hood, how does a user progress through the life cycle? You can start to really shift the economics around what traditionally was a headache and expensive and cumbersome, really into this new revenue stream where not only are you starting to generate revenue from the payment itself that's going out the door, but you have opportunities to drive spend back, to have a repeat customer, to have that additional lift while lowering your cost of acquisition for those consumers. And you're doing it all around that payout as that single point to drive and influence that behavior. And then the last thing, if you're starting to think about, okay, I want to have this seamless user experience overall. It's one thing to be shifting from checks, and then maybe you want to just go right to a virtual card, for example. But I'll tell you right now, if you're in the refund space, don't do that. You need to consider the regulatory considerations around what do you need to provide. Maybe you need to default to a check after a certain amount of time. Maybe you need to provide additional modalities that sit behind that virtual card in order to comply with, call it the CFPB, what have you. So really leaning into payment experts that have built that experience over time, that live it day in and day out. And then how does that tie into where are the revenue opportunities? Can they support opportunities for me to put my brand front and center, to be top of wallet for an individual consumer? Can they offer all these different modalities under one point of integration, one contract, one support model? That's really paramount when you're starting to really craft that user experience overall. The other item around the seamless user experience is, granted, there's these opportunities for you as a business to grow and scale, but how can you start to customize that for the individual preferences, right? So talked a little bit about how maybe my needs as an individual consumer will change over time. I may be perfectly fine to get a payment and wait a few days in order to get it, but I also may need to get that money immediately. That choice is a huge component of that. Also, Julie and I may have different preferences, right? She still may want to get that check. I may want to get it to my Venmo account because that's where I'm doing most of my transactions, right? So providing the personalization from that perspective. There's also opportunities to provide offers and discounts, right? When you're thinking about, okay, I'm delivering an email to this individual. I know that they've spent money at my store the last 10 times. I can give them 20% off this, increase my loyalty, increase engagement, drive that spend back. If I can put in opportunities to have that user navigate off that payment experience back into my ecosystem, I can do things like capture additional information, promote additional transactions, what have you. And then the last point around the seamless experience is something I like to call omni payout capabilities. So this would be, especially today, you're going to have individuals that are interacting with you from only online, maybe from a desktop, maybe from mobile wallet. They're going into your store, they're using your mobile app, making sure that you have a really consistent and well thought out strategy that encompasses all of those points of interaction from an individual consumer to your point of business is paramount. And then also just leaning into, think about that investment that you made around charging convenience fees for that incoming flow of funds. You better be thinking about how you're matching that on the outbound disbursement, right? Naturally, a lot of companies want to keep those funds in-house, but reframing that payout, especially when you can reframe from that cost center to a profit center, that payout is your next best driver, and oftentimes your potential last point of engagement with that consumer. So if you can make it elegant, if you can give them choice, if you can have them access their funds seamlessly, if you can start to put your brand first, if you can start to drive that consumer behavior into something that's more advantageous for both of you, and do it in a way that feels like second nature to that recipient, that's where the cool stuff happens. And as somebody who lives and breathes payments every day, that's what gets us really excited about shifting kind of what was this really painful process with checks into this next horizon of growth for a lot of the companies that we're working with. So we're going to take one look here at when you add everything together, what does this actually look like in action? So we're going to walk through kind of a high level generic experience from what does the communication point look like to that recipient? If you're leaning into digital first, generally you can deliver an email with a link where now they're interacting with a secure site. They may have to provide additional credentials like their policy number, their claim number, maybe their zip code, for example, to have that added security in order to interact with it. You could be sending them a text message if you want some real-time notifications, right? But how are you supporting your digital payout experience with digital communication and reinforcement? Maybe somebody didn't click that link originally. You better be reminding them to click that link, right? If you're looking to deliver those funds. The second component that you'll notice in this demo that we'll walk through here in a second is the choice, right? So not only do we have that digital and more than one, but we have a choice of many. So thinking about how you're actually delivering payments to people, how you're getting funds into their hands to be leveraged sooner than later is paramount. And then giving them, maybe in the context of their lives or the context of the payment even, there may be a certain need to get money quicker, maybe okay to get it delayed. They may be okay to have it sit in their mobile wallet because they know they're going to go to the coffee shop after this call and buy some coffee, right? So they'll tap to pay. And lastly, when you think about holistically the user experience for it, it's critical for somebody to have this be really native to their engagement overall, right? So you don't want to have to read a manual in order to here's how you accept your payment and scroll through it. You want it to feel really natural from a user perspective. So you'll notice here where we start is on an email transaction, right? So we're delivering a payment to somebody. Branding can be around it to reinforce it. You'll notice the number of choices there. You'll notice there's opportunities, which is really slick when you start to think about how is somebody actually engaging with that transaction, and when can I start to promote my brand and reinforce my brand with that individual. That gets really slick from the perspective around driving spend back. So there are certain flows where, maybe you're providing a payout for somebody who's coming in and maybe they're trading in their hockey skates, and you're usually giving out cash to that individual when they're giving you your hockey skates, right? Being able to give them a virtual card transaction with your brand and your logo all over that, and then maybe even a discount to personalize that experience a little bit further. That can all be done seamlessly through, at the time of payment, this digital experience, which is super slick. You lose that completely if you're just doing an ACH and somebody sees a line item on a bank statement, or you're mailing a check and the only real estate you have is the upper third, where you can put your logo and a thank you. But with the digital component, you're interacting with them through the email, you're interacting through them as you're claiming the payment, putting your brand all around that. You're having your brand sit top of wallet when they add it to a mobile wallet. You're driving promotion and spend back opportunities. You're providing choice. So holistically, you have a number of really sticky interaction points with that individual. And at the end of the day, when you think about maybe it's not just convenience fees for a faster payment modality, maybe it's the increased revenue lift that you get from driving a really impactful incentive and also providing an opportunity for somebody to use that incentive money in the same exact flow. You'll see how quick it is too, right? Like literally click on, select a virtual card, confirm your selection, add it to a mobile wallet, and now you can go and buy your coffee once you get off the card. There are certain flows here too, where when you think about maybe there are transactions where it's a single load flow, and it's an exiting subscriber, or it's that Max is moving out or paying off his vehicle or had his procedure get done, that one-time flow does have the opportunity to turn into a repeat customer. But then you're also going to have flows where maybe Max is coming in and he's trading in his hockey skates every week, right? And that's just part of his gig. So he's doing that, and you can start to deliver maybe a recurring experience where you start to shift that payment modality more into a financial instrument that Max can leverage as his day-to-day. And when you sit on top of the payment data itself, you can really start to drive how many transactions have I sent to Max? Is he a repeat loyalty customer? Max himself can go and I can look at what's my balance remaining on the card. Does this look right? Maybe I need to go find some more hockey skates that I can trade in. So you really start to drive that symbiotic relationship where not only are you getting more information about how Max's preferences in order to receive that transaction, but also Max is really able to leverage this almost as a singular financial instrument himself. So the single load and reloadable flows, you can do some really interesting things there, especially when you start to look at digital savvy consumers. So I think that's played enough. All right. So that's kind of what we wanted to walk through in kind of a high level. So we started kind of orienting ourselves around how are people actually receiving payments today. That $3 trillion flows from business to person payments, $1.7 trillion in physical paper checks. It's expensive, it's cumbersome, people don't want to get them, they're putting them on their walls, making wallpaper out of them. It's also cumbersome from a complexity standpoint. If I call in and I say, hey, where's my money at? Somebody can tell me when they cut the check. They can't tell me where it is, if it got lost, right? Which gets really interesting. So when you start to think about digitizing that, right? Some of that goes away. You also introduce additional touch points where you can start to add them to drip campaigns. They can access their money a lot faster. Not only can they access their money a lot faster, but they can also be influenced by real estate that goes along with the transaction. We talked a little bit about understanding and some relative tactics around starting to get to when and how you should be surveying your individuals, going through those detailed surveys, thinking about the timing, thinking about what the data is telling you. It's probably the most important part of especially if you're in product, is actually getting out and talking to both your customers and your recipients firsthand. We then talked about where do you sit in the market from a business, right? How are you aligning towards where your market is trending? Maybe there's opportunities where you can leverage the statistics at large on where individuals are going to influence your payout strategy. But more importantly, starting to think about those insights that you gathered from those surveys to really start to map out and segment your customers and what their journey looks like from cradle to grave as they interact with you as a company. Making sure your outbound payments are equally robust as your inbound payments, making sure that it's as easy to get paid, making sure that your brand is front and center, right? And providing that touch point. And then we spent a little bit on how you can actually start to leverage that and think holistically around the user experience itself. So if you're going through those increased costs and you're really recognizing how painful checks are, if you have that regulatory burden that's lingering over your head and you're trying to find a way in order to manage your cash constraints or start to digitize your transactions, or if you're just naturally in that position where touch points with consumers are your number one way to drive new business, you want to make sure that you're thinking about that choice, speed, and convenience that people are telling you. And at the end of the day, embracing that really customer-centric approach, putting yourselves in the shoes of the recipient, thinking about how you would want to get paid, and then building the supporting strategy around it, you really start to tear away the pack, if you will, and you'll look at a handful of providers that are able to do all of these things, and then you're going to find some are a lot more nuanced with regards to their approach to fit specific spaces. So when I think about where not only companies but financial institutions at large can start to enhance how people are getting paid, when they're getting paid, their preference of being paid, that supporting user experience, putting your recipients first is of utmost importance. So hopefully you took away some key items here. I'll pass it back to you, Julie, for closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Max. I mean, I felt like I was nodding my head through the whole thing because there were so many pieces that you said that really resonated, not only with me as an end consumer, but also as an expert in the fintech space, just having seen so many companies, struggle. And I do feel like paper checks are kind of one of the last frontiers in fintech to finally receive the digitalization effort. So it's great to see you guys working in that space. So with that, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Max and to the OnBe team. If you'd like to follow up with them, their contact information is being displayed now on the screen. So take a screenshot, take a photo, go ahead and follow up with them so you can get some of those stats and see how you can work with them in the future. And also a huge thanks to you, our audience. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you at the next Finovate webinar or at Finovate Fall next month. Thanks.